Welcome to the European Climate Pact Podcast, your space to explore climate stories, ideas, and action, brought to you by Pact ambassadors and country coordinator in Ireland. Launched by the European Commission, the Climate Pact invites everyone to take part in building a greener, more sustainable Europe. From everyday climate actions to systemic change, the Pact is about connecting people and empowering communities. Each episode features thought-provoking conversations with changemakers, experts, creatives, and citizens who are driving solutions across Ireland and beyond. Subscribe and stay updated on the latest episodes via Southeast Energy Agency's YouTube channel and social media. Don't forget to check your favorite podcast platform to listen, follow, and share. Let's get started.
Welcome, Rudi. Lovely to have you. Nice to see you again. I wanted to have you on the Climate Pact platform because the work you've been doing recently, I think, is very important, especially for capacity building and for helping people to understand the science and different aspects of data that a lot of people struggle with, and that can be very informative. I was wondering if you could give a very short introduction to yourself, to your background, and what you're currently doing at the moment. I know it's a lot, so feel free to, it's short, but don't feel like you have to completely cut out what you're doing. Just feel free to elaborate on what you're doing at the moment.
Sure. Thanks, Kilian, and thanks for having me on. So I'm Rudi. I'm based in Naas in Ireland, from Dublin originally, and I run a business called Data and Design. And really, data and design is all about bringing data to life. So that's kind of what I do. I'll talk a little bit more about what that exactly means, I suppose, in a few minutes. But really, what I try to do is show people the power of data, the usefulness of having open source data available for public consumption, especially open source data around climate. My background is weird. I was originally a mechanical engineer. I picked mechanical engineering as kind of the place to go for people who can't make up their minds, because it's one of the broadest courses. So I couldn't make up my mind in school, so I picked engineering. Couldn't make up my mind in second year engineering, so I picked mechanical engineering. I have a PhD in thermal sciences and fluid mechanics, so that's probably a whole other podcast. But I found myself kind of always drawn to my PhD was very visual. I was using high-speed imagery, high-speed laser stuff, and I loved the kind of more visual side of things. And a friend of mine kind of recommended I transition into data science. Tried doing that and wasn't having much success in the jobs market. This was about 2018 or 2019. And I then kind of discovered this field called data visualization, which was kind of what I'd been doing for quite a lot of my career, but didn't realize was actually a thing. So I was doing that in the consulting world for a few years, and then I left about 2.5-3 years ago to start up my own business. And really, I'm trying to focus on public sector Irish data.
Brilliant. Yeah. I saw recently you working with, was it Smart Cities? Was that it?
So the recent project was with Smart Dublin. So I was working with them on the Dublin Region Active Travel Dashboard. And what that is it was an initiative organised by Smart Dublin, but they basically got stakeholders across all these different areas. So we're talking policymakers, universities, things like that, and started about a year ago discussing what data sources are out there in Dublin at the moment around active travel. And then I was brought in as a kind of designer and developer about how can we bring that data to life. And some of my work would be like a dashboard format. So if anyone's used Power BI or Tableau and you see that kind of business dashboard, that's kind of what this is. Whereas some of my other work is kind of more, storytelling based. But really for this piece with Smart Dublin, it was around no data set is perfect. They're all flawed, especially, open government data sets. And I think that the hope here is that, yes, some of these different data sets have limitations and flaws, but a lot of those flaws won't necessarily overlap. So if you've got multiple different data sources across a piece, in this case, we've got 5 different data sources, the limitations of one are actually the strength of another. And you can kind of get a more nuanced, complete picture about, in this case, active travel by looking at those different data sets. And hopefully the hope is that by showing people the power of having open source, well documented, freely available data, that governments will be more motivated to make more data freely available, because that's really what I'm after.
Brilliant. But changing the topic, although I know it relates to what you do. Currently, what the Climate Pact is really doing is trying to push initiatives around sustainability and the Climate Pact agreement, trying to get that, what the European Union has agreed to, getting each country to implement it. How do you feel data can help inform people and get them potentially to, I know it can sound even a bit exaggerated, but data can help people change the world in a way. They can actually take actions that have more of a positive impact on the world than they might have been doing previously. Do you think that that's true, or do you think data is because I think data is changing in a way, isn't it? It used to be viewed as this very cold, boring sort of Excel file, and now it's becoming with AI and everything something that potentially can be used for something else.
Yeah, there's this old trope of data as oil, which I really don't like. And you'll hear it all the time that data is this like crude oil, has to be refined and it needs to extract out and harvest the insights, and all this oil-based language, which I always found really strange, because we're almost comparing something favorably to oil, which should we be doing? And really, I really should get the person's name to credit them, but I don't have it to hand here, was talking about, rather than saying data is everywhere, which makes it sound like it's oil, it's in the ground, it has to be harnessed, that instead we say, why not say everything is data? So every single thing we are doing is data. And then the question is, okay, but a lot of this data is useless or isn't being captured or isn't being measured in some way. So really where I see the power of data for things like this Climate Pact is not only in showing people what they can do, but also measuring the success of what's already been done. So again, to link it back to this dashboard for a moment, it's actually really hard when we create active travel infrastructure in Ireland to then look back on it afterwards and say, oh yeah, this was a success. And for example, the canal down the road for me in Naas, where I live, is being pedestrianised. And from a quality of life perspective, it's just so amazing. I was out running there this morning. There are there are women and children on the canal. Normally that would have been a shortcut that people would take to and from work. So cars would be bombing it down. Whereas now there's women and children, there's a really nice vibe to it, really nice nature, all that kind of stuff. That's really hard information to quantify. I know in my heart of hearts it's correct, but how do you even go about measuring that? And even looking at some of these active travel sources, people are having to use things like these pedestrian counters. I don't know if you've seen them around cities, but they're the things, the kind of totem poles that measure, people or cyclists walking past them, say. And a lot of the time people would have to use those to show, oh yeah, more people went on the route afterwards. But those poles are they're not always the most reliable source. Sometimes they can be off in the calibration. Sometimes people might just take one street over and you're not capturing that information at all. So the point is, for me, when it comes to data, is that literally everything we're doing right now is data, and we're creating, they talk of the information age, and really I think we're in the age of noise, where we're just creating low quality crap information that's feeding chatbots and feeding large language models. So really I see my role and the role of kind of designing this as understanding what data is important and thinking about how we can measure it. Don't know if that quite answered your question. It's a bit of a kind of went on a ramble there.
No, I love that. I feel in very crude terms, it's a bit of an awakening that now we've realized that data, well, everything is data. And in a way, like you're right, we kind of separated it from. We used to try thinking that data is maybe this sort of crude oil sort of analogy, but it's a lot more than that. It's something that's everywhere, and you need to have quality data. So that's interesting, especially with the IPCC reports. That was hugely needed. We need quality data. So another thing I'm wondering is, when, let's say, we're transitioning to being more sustainable, is there a way, as you were saying, that we can measure and use data? But what do you think? I was kind of alluding that to it before. Do you think that there's a way that we should use data to educate people, or should we continue sort of business as usual? I'm kind of thinking of death by PowerPoint, you know?
Yeah.
Or is there a way?
Well, I hope in 2025 that people realize that business as usual is just total disaster. So that's like, we can let's take business as usual off the table as a starting point. There's a couple of thoughts I have around it, because when we're talking about getting people to change their habits using data, what I don't want to be doing is putting individual blame onto the consumer, when the consumer is not the person to blame for a lot of these things, and it's the large corporations and governments that are ultimately driving a lot of this. That being said, I think things like gamification in a kind of playful way are a really interesting way of triggering kind of behavioral change. And I don't want to use the language of we had a few years ago from the tech world, this idea of nudging and all this kind of stuff, which has that kind of darker side to it, like the way that our notifications on our phones are red because that captures the human attention and things like that. That being said, I still think there could be something in this kind of gamification. Like, for example, I'm from Dublin and I've moved to Naas, and I have a close friend who's from Dublin and has moved to Maynooth. And the two of us are always competing with our towns, trying to see if any of the remaining Dublin people will move out to us. So Maynooth and Naas are of the same size, and they're usually number 1 and 2 in the tidy towns competition we have in Ireland. So we're always trying to compete for this. And something I've been thinking about, and I've written a proposal for a project, is around can we bring in something like this gamification using data, around, for example, people's commuting patterns, like I have in my piece here. Could we bring in something that kind of encourages gamification and friendly competition, so that neighborhoods will potentially take more sustainable choices? Because I think that kind of competition is always a really nice, could be a really nice one, but it is a balancing act, because like I said before, you don't want to say, oh, if everyone acted like me, the world would be better, things like that. At an individual level, what we really need to do is lobby the governments and these corporations to stop, because they're the ones that are really changing that.
I love that completely. And I feel I used to live in Maynooth, so maybe I was more on the Maynooth side. But I do feel the advantage of those two towns is also the great train connections to Dublin. Like, you could be in 40 minutes in Dublin. I was also living in the countryside in Atboy, and I felt that was really missing. You had to cycle to a bus stop in the rain and sort of wait. So I do believe active travel, as you're saying, we need governments to take action and make sure that there is the possibility for people to actually do. And then we can measure, but we have to have the infrastructure there for people to actually do the right thing, to take the right actions. And I want to talk about community building, which is something in the Climate Pact movement and sustainability movement that's talked a lot about. And if you could mention, and I know that you've currently started up a community, and if you could talk about the journey and what you think is the advantage of building a community.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what we're at, mid-February. So last month we had the inaugural meeting of Dublin DataViz. So that's a community for people in the Dublin area who are interested in visualizing data. And that could be, you might be a journalist, you might be a developer, you might be a designer, or you might just be someone in an organization that kind of likes data and is kind of tired of watching businesses make decisions based on gut feel rather than actual information. I know I sure was. So we had that first meetup in January, which was remarkably successful. Had an amazing speaker, Brian Rogers, on it, talking about some of his experiments, which happened to be in active travel as well. He made this amazing kind of collision self-reported near miss tracker. So this what he was talking about was when you're cycling, a lot of the stuff that's reported are fatalities, right? That information is useful, but what's potentially more useful is these near misses. And I'm sure having lived in Dublin, you can talk about those few junctions, which are those ones that you're kind of rolling the dice every time you go past them, right? So we created this self-reported version for that. And he was speaking at this event, but it was remarkable. We had like over 60 people at the event. It's something that I'd said I'd do about when I set up my business 2.5 years ago, but I was always hemming and hawing about it, and actually it took one of my friends in the data viz world to kind of push me and say, just go and do it. I think one concern I had at the start, and it was definitely unfounded, was I was like, it'll just be my friends there. Do you know what I mean? Because I was setting up the meetup group and I was getting on to, I do some teaching, I do different things. And I was worried that like, it would just be people I knew coming to make me feel better or things like that. And I was speaking to my friend in the data viz space about this, and she was like, so what? You know, she was like, "This, just go out and do it. Like, why are you sitting here like worrying about, oh, the community will be too many of my friends?" She was like, just go out. And she was very like forward, very upfront with that. And it was great. And it just like a light bulb switched in my head. I was like, yeah, like, you know, that was selfish thinking on my part. You know, it's very easy to say, oh, I won't go and do something. So that was taking her advice on board. I went and had the first event, and I'd say of the 60 people who were there, I only knew half of them. So like, you know, half of the room I'd never met before. And you know, and I'd imagine that number will get even larger for the subsequent meetings. So I think setting up that community is amazing. I've seen some great like examples in coding, in machine learning. They're some of the communities I'm in Dublin. And watching how the people there have so carefully curated that community and making sure it's a place that like people at different stages could benefit from. So people, you know, you want something that's accessible to first timers, that rewards people for coming back, that allows people to foster collaborations. You don't want it to be something that turns into a drag, that's on too frequently. So that there's lots of kind of like subtle decisions in terms of balancing that, and also just letting it breathe and letting it be itself, and not I'm maybe a little bit of an over-analytical person, so letting that community just, you know, bubble away itself. It doesn't need me interfering with it all the time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I knowing you, I also know that it's someone who's really a great person behind it, and I think that's what we need with a lot of communities. So I think people shouldn't be scared. They should go out and do it. If they've got something that can really change the world. If it's something terrible, then maybe they shouldn't. But
yeah,
that's for another day. But what I was thinking is, you were mentioning the near miss tracker, and I did a course in ETH Zurich a few years ago, where it was similar to sort of more qualitative data in a way, where you're cycling, and you can cycle in the countryside. You can cycle across Italy, but you're going a lot slower than the car. And similar to the near miss, you sort of talk about your surroundings, and you try and learn from them and see things that you might not see usually. Because you come from a very, very strong data background. I myself, having studied engineering, I know there's qualitative data. We sort of look down on anyone who does qualitative data. Not always, I think it's changing. But do you think qualitative data brings, or at least informs the strategy that then you can use more quantitative data to really figure out the solution to different problems?
100%. So like in my business, I suppose I kind of do freelance work for public sector clients and private sector clients. So not all my data is publicly available. So a client will come to me with the data set, and if they come to me with a quant data set, I'm always like, okay, yeah, fine, you know, I'll do it, yeah, grand. Whereas if a client comes to me with a data set that's a mixture of qual and quant, that's what gets me really excited, because that's where we can uncover the stories in this data. And like I've worked with some incredible kind of design researchers before who are pure qualitative, and the stories, the understanding of, at that time it was understanding of customer, but also understanding the human experience. I think qualitative is so important. And I think there is this kind of temptation to reduce everything to a number, just throw it into your quant metrics, using, for example, ESG as an example. Oh yes, we put all the numbers into a cauldron, we stirred it around, and the number 89 has popped up. Congratulations, you're an 89. Like, what does that even mean? And I'm always really interested in the stories behind the numbers. So I think the qualitative stuff is so interesting, and in my work, I always try to tie in those, where I can, those personal stories. That's more in my story-driven research rather than the dashboards, which are pretty quant. But in my story-based research, I'll try and talk to actual human beings and to hear about their human experiences, which I think a lot of people or a lot of organizations kind of dismiss that work, or worse, they do it at the very end. So they're like, oh yeah, they'll show people the designs, and they don't have time to even go in and change those designs. So like, what's the point?
Yeah, for sure. Could you talk more about the work you've done with storytelling, and the way you also started it, the reason behind it? I know, if there is a reason.
Yeah, no, 100%. So a lot of my pieces aren't just like, there's just different ways we can interact with data. And one of my favorites is, and I did not invent this word, unfortunately, I wish I did, is a word called scrolly telling. So that's where you're scrolling down your phone or scrolling down the computer, and then the visuals are moving around or interacting as you're doing that. So you'll see a lot of that in things like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. As you're scrolling through, you're getting these infographics that are moving on the page. I think that's such a wonderful way to kind of consume information, because it lets you consume it at your own pace, unlike a video. It lets you interact with it if you want, but you can just keep scrolling and reading otherwise. And I just find it such a nice way of blending that kind of information. So depending on what my piece is for, again, most of my, again, depends, about 50% of my pieces, I would say, are these kind of scrolly telling pieces. And that's where you're trying to tell kind of a different type of story with data. So for example, I did a project called Dear Dublin, and that was with Dublin City Council. And the idea behind this is that they send out this survey to Dubliners every few years called Your Dublin, Your Voice. And it's a fantastic survey. It's got loads of qual and quant data in it, asking Dubliners, over 1,000 Dubliners, their real opinion on different things. And this particular one was around tourism and what their views on tourism are in the city. And there was lots of really ranged, nuanced responses to that. And again, the format that typically would be in would be quite a dry, I suppose, PDF report that looks like a PowerPoint, is essentially a PowerPoint. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the general public aren't going to really consume that information. So I was tasked with knowing that in a more creative way. So I created this piece called Dear Dublin. And what Dear Dublin is a bar table. It's actually a photograph of a bar table from a pub in Nice. They gave me a few weird looks as I sat in there taking a photograph of the bar table. But what happens is that as you scroll through the piece, these postcards start stacking onto the bar table. And the idea was that what was coming out to us from reading these survey results is that these are messages from real Dubliners voicing their real concerns, and also, good things too. So the idea is that these cards kind of stack and layer on top of each other, where each postcard is a combination of handwriting and data visualizations that look like drawings, basically. So it's a totally different way of kind of consuming what would be typically quite a dull, dry survey. So that's where I think these kind of interesting modes of storytelling can really engage with people.
Yeah, that's lovely. And you mentioned that you also teach. Has your approach to teaching changed across the years? And do you think that, being very visual is important to teach people about different subjects?
Yeah, so I teach a couple of things. I normally teaching in Dublin Business School, teaching business intelligence and visualization. So that's making strong business dashboards that really help people solve problems. I also do some guest lecturing in NCAD, which is working with designers, where they have a module where they have to find some of their personal data and bring that to life. So two very different teaching subjects. But the way I say it to my students in both subjects is that like ultimately what I'm trying to do is prepare them for the real world, whether they're working in a business, starting their own business, working in university and things like that. So I want, for my students here in the college, for example, in DBS where I am, I'm always saying to them, for my assignment, they have to go and find an interesting data set and create a dashboard with it. But I'm always saying to them, like, why not find a data from where you're from? Like, we have a large international contingent here. So it's like, if you're from wherever, find some open data there and see, because maybe there's not stories being told about that data right now, or maybe that data is being obscured. And I'm always encouraging them to find the latest Irish data we have too, and really bring that to life, focusing that way. And so I think there's like being really visual, but also like, I think a lot of how I hire for my business is totally portfolio based now. Like I'm always interested in a nice varied range portfolio. I'm not looking at resumes and stuff like that. That's what caught me out when I tried to go into data science the first time around. I didn't have that data science experience, but weirdly, I actually had lots of experience working with data, visualizing data. I just wasn't hitting those recruiter, points they want to see in a CV. So I take full advantage of that myself when I'm hiring for my business, because I can hire people with amazing portfolios that aren't being picked up by those kind of typical recruiters, shall we say. So a lot of what I'm doing is preparing students for the real world. So I want them to leave my course with a project they can put on their portfolio. And the second thing I want them to do is that like a lot of these students are going to be using AI in their jobs. That's the reality of it now. And you might have different views on these different AI tools and whether there's a lot of hot air behind them and whether, they're going to accelerate climate disaster. But the jobs that my students are going to go and do in the workplace are going to involve AI. So I need to make sure that my material involves AI. And I think it's easy to just say, no, there's no AI, AI is cheating, we can't do it this way. What's harder is to say, okay, how can we use AI creatively in these assignments while not just getting AI to spit out the assignment for us? So to give you an example, in my assignment here in the college, in Dublin Business School, I encourage my students to find their own data set, find a data set that they really feel passionate about or interested in. And then potentially, if you can imagine this Excel file with all these columns, like why not put those column names and data into ChatGPT and ask it, is there any combination of these columns that you could find interesting or do things with? So that really helps. And for example, we do an in-class example with them, and I do it actually. Just be real focused on cycling today. I don't know why, but anyway, I do with my students. We look at the Dublin bikes, the rental bikes in Dublin, as a worked example in class, and that's a very simple data set. It just captures information about the different bike stations in Dublin that you get those rental bikes from, and what every 5 minutes they log how many bikes are at each station. So a very, very simple data set. But actually there's a huge amount you can do with that. So if you put that data set into ChatGPT and ask it for inspiration, it will say things like, oh yeah, why not pull out the date and time part so you can plot the time separately? Why not, figure out if a date is a weekday or a weekend? So if you take a station like Houston Station, that's going to have incredibly different footfall on a weekday when people are commuting versus a weekend. So it's able to give us inspiration around those kind of things. So a huge part of my work is preparing students for reality post-college, and that's really what's reflecting in.
Thank you so much. I know you're very busy, so we're going to cut it short. But it was lovely to have you on. And I hope, at least me hearing from you, I feel inspired to look at a random data set and stare at it. Well, maybe ask ChatGPT to, because I used to just stare at it for hours, but now just ask ChatGPT.
More than stare at it, if I was to give one final recommendation, there's a wonderful piece of software called Flourish. I don't know if you've played around with it before.
Yeah, well, I've heard of it, but I need to start playing around with it.
Yeah. So Flourish is, I really would, whenever my students are, students are asking me, oh, I'm interested in this data visualization, what should I do next? I'm in no way affiliated with Flourish, nor do I really use it in my own work, but I use it for exploration. And it's a wonderful piece of software. The free tier is incredible. You can just put in a data set and straight away start creating these interactive, these beautiful interactive pieces. So it's a really nice way of doing these things visually. It also, if people do Canva presentations, it has an integration into Canva. So you can straight away get interactive visuals in your presentations. not that we should be recommending people to make more presentations, but if we admit that presentations are a reality, Flourish is a really nice way to kind of bring those to life. So rather than staring at an Excel, you can create these really highly interactive pieces with Flourish.
Brilliant. And just to say, we're not sponsored by Flourish, but
we are not sponsored by Flourish. Flourish, if Flourish are listening, if Flourish are listening, they should come over to Dublin Dataviz in April for the next event.
Thanks a lot for being on. And if people want to reach out, just search for Visual Data Societies. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So the Dataviz Society is a global society of people interested in visualizing data. If people want to reach out to me, my business is called Data and Design, or I can give you my. Kilian, I'll give you my LinkedIn for people to reach out as well.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you for staying with us through the European Climate Pact Podcast, hosted by the Pact Ambassadors and Country Coordinator in Ireland. We hope you're feeling inspired to take climate action in your own life, community, or organization, because real change starts with conversations just like these. Catch up on all episodes via Southeast Energy Agency's YouTube page and follow us on social media for updates, behind the scenes, and more. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, or anyone ready to be part of Europe's climate journey. Talking about climate's journey, visit the Climate Pact website, climate-pact.europa.eu, to explore all the lovely citizens engagement tools you could use to start your climate journey today. Until next time, stay curious, stay active, and stay climate conscious.
Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the author and authors only, and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union. The European Union cannot be held responsible for them.